there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessica Isla, or Jess. Thank you so much for joining me today. As you, I'm sure, can tell from the title, we are going to be doing a true crime get ready with me. I guess credit to Bailey Sarian. I believe she's the first one that kind of started these like makeup murder videos, but I do really enjoy watching these videos. I find that I like listening to true crime stories and then being able to watch someone kind of do something, and for someone who loves makeup, it's kind of like the perfect combination for me. So I'm hoping that this will reach someone who also likes those two things together. So if you like this type of video, I hope you'll subscribe and hang out with me in my other videos that won't always be like true crime, but sometimes, but yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get right into the story. So today, we're going to be talking about the murder of Betty Gore by her friend, Candy Montgomery. Ooh, get ready for this one. It's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it ever since I watched the show Love and Death on HBO Max. Highly recommend you watch it. I got a lot of my info kind of from that show in a way, because they used the Texas Monthly articles that I also read and used as for a lot of my information from this, and then just random kind of like Wikipedia and Google diving for like random dates and such. But yes, highly recommend that show and also those Texas Monthly articles. But let's jump into the beginning. So we're in 1978, disco era, and we are in the small town of Wylie, Texas, which is a North Texas town just kind of like outside of like the Dallas area. So we're looking at, late 70s, Texas, very conservative, like traditional family values type of area. So we have Candy Montgomery, who lives there with her husband, Pat Montgomery, and their two kids. Now, from what I can gather from what I read, their ages are probably 8 and 6, maybe 8 and 7, 9 and 7, something like that. But kind of around those ages. They had lived there since the year prior. And they moved in when Pat got a job with Texas Instruments, which is that brand that I only know from the calculator that you need in high school that was way too expensive. If you know, you know. But they have been living there. They go to church. They really ingrained themselves in the life in their tiny town because, again, it was one of those areas where you just kind of knew everybody. It was small. It was, just, again, a small little town where you knew everyone and you went to church and you did all this stuff, and that was kind of your life, So, there, the Montgomerys would meet the Gores. And with the Gores, you have Alan Gore, who's the father, and then you have Betty Gore, the mother, and then their daughter, Alyssa, who's around the same age as Candy's older child, her daughter, Jenny. And they would meet through church, and they would become friends, family friends, whatnot. And they all the adults were in the choir together. And so it was just one of those, friendly neighborhood family whatnots. So around 1978, Candy decided that she wanted to have an affair. Her marriage was passionless, loveless. It was just very kind of by the book, doing, kind of going through the motions of every day and being a family, but not really, being in a marriage and, having that passion and love for each other anymore. So she, had been kind of tossing around this idea of getting into a little boogie woogie with somebody random. She obviously hadn't decided on anybody, but it was just something that had been floating around her mind. One night, while they're at a volleyball game, Candy is playing on the court with Alan Gore, and they accidentally bump into each other on the court, and Candy gets knocked over. But she would later tell a friend that this was the kind of moment that, and like realization that hit her, that she wanted to have an affair with Alan. There was just something about, like, when they smacked into each other, she felt something, she thought he felt something, and so ultimately she kind of decided, I think this is the person to have this affair with. Never thinking in a million years it would be him. From everything I can gather, you know, Candy was this kind of like vivacious, like very friendly woman who, like, you know, the whole town really liked to be around. And Alan was just a little bit like kind of reserved, not the most attractive guy, like conventionally, I guess. And so when she told her friend this, her friend was kind of like, well, that's why him kind of thing. But she couldn't explain it. She just, you know, she had this connection with him on the court. So one night after a choir practice, she gets a chance to talk to Alan in the parking lot alone. And she essentially tells him that she can't stop thinking about him and she doesn't really know what to do with that like information. And that's kind of all she says. And then she like hops out of the car and she just goes about her day. Actually, I don't know if she's in the car. That's just how they present it in the show. So a lot of that's mixing in my mind. But again, the show took their whole storyline from this article, which is supposed to be like the whole account from Candy's point of view, and really the only one that exists. Anyway, so she tells him this. She does a little jump out of the car, and then he's kind of dumbfounded, and she just, you know, whatever. So after this, Alan cannot stop thinking about Candy and what she said. And so about a week later, he ends up talking to her after another, you know, either volleyball game or choir practice in the parking lot, and essentially asked her like what she meant by that, like what to do. And she pretty much plain out says, would you be interested in having an affair? Which the whole time I was reading this, all I could think was like, this is the most like kind of like polite affair. Like everything about it, like from the way they were like talking about it, from like how long they decided to actually go ahead and do it. Like it was just like everything about it was really strange. I don't know, polite's not exactly the right word because obviously it wasn't polite, but like it was interesting. So you know, at this, Alan doesn't really know what to say. He tells her that Betty had an affair with a college student a few years back, and it really destroyed their marriage, or it really hurt like them and him, and so he just can't imagine doing that to Betty. No. And so he initially kind of like says no and isn't sure what to do with that, but then of course he ends up kissing her, which, like, confusing. And Candy is very confused by this because she's hearing what he's saying, but he's obviously physically doing the opposite. So she's kind of, like, telling her friend later, he kissed me. Like, there's obviously something there, but, you know, whatever. At this point, I can't do this unless he decides that he wants to do it with me. So, you know, that was kind of it. And then Alan would call Candy and ask to meet up for lunch. And they'd meet up for lunch. They would have tons of small talk. And then, of course, it got to the point where she's like, Alan, what are we doing? You know, like, why are we here? And he essentially says that he wants to have this affair, but he wants to talk it out and plan it. And, you know, they just can't really come to a conclusion because they both want to have this affair, but they also both are, like, scared of consequences and what's going to happen, especially Alan. And so they ultimately decide to, like, meet up again and just talk about it. And this is what I mean. Like, they just kind of keep meeting up and, like, talking through a possibility of having an affair, but not actually doing anything. So this ultimately gets to the point where they have a meeting at Candy's house. And Candy says, you know, if we kind of put all these rules in place, then, you know, no one could possibly get hurt. We won't get hurt. Neither of our spouses will get hurt, and we can, like, conduct this affair without anybody finding out, and it'll all be fine. You know, like, we'll just do this thing. It'll be totally just, like, physical, and then that'll be it. So a couple of the rules were they would They would meet up for lunch during Alan's lunch break at a hotel. They would split all the costs, like, between everything. If they had whoever got an emotional attachment, they would end it right then and there. Or if someone did, get an emotional attachment, they would end it then and there. No even thinking about it, like, it would just be over. No one would get hurt. That was a big one for them, that, like, neither of their spouses would get hurt. I don't know what they were thinking, because unless you are in an open relationship and everyone's aware of everything going on, then someone's going to get hurt. You know, like, it's just inevitable. But people always think they can get away with stuff like that because, you know, emotions and feelings get in the way, and then next thing you know, someone's hurt. So, you know, what are you going to do? But they have this meeting, they write out all this list of rules, and that is the last time they actually meet to talk. And the next time they meet is in December of 1978 when the affair begins. And they go to the Continental Hotel, which Candy finds. And just like planned, she brings lunch so that they will have more time together. He doesn't have to worry about getting lunch on the way back to the office. And they can sit and they can have lunch, and then they can, like, get busy, if you will, you know, or if you know what I mean. So they meet, this happens, and their affair commences. From then on, they would meet at a hotel called the Como, which was, like, a little bit seedier, a little not as nice as the Continental, which from what I can tell, Candy seemed to enjoy that because she kind of liked the, like, sneaking around and, you know, again, she wanted passion. She specifically, the quote, fireworks was really important to her. Like, her marriage had just really fizzled out, and she was kind of stuck in this cycle of, like, kids and husband, but nothing, like, no passion and no fun. And so that's ultimately was, like, her main goal in this, was to just, you know, let loose and have some fun, and, like, want more fun than, like, you know, having this affair, like, you know, this mysterious kind of, like, scandalous thing, and, like, meeting at this kind of seedy hotel to conduct this affair. Like, you know, for an average housewife, this was, like, very exciting stuff for her and exactly what she wanted, and the whole reason she even started this affair in the first place, you know. So this would continue for a few months, and at this time, Alan's wife, Betty, was actually pregnant. So, like I said, they have a daughter, Alyssa, who's probably around, like, 8. I can't be, like, too sure about any of this. And so she, like, they had, you know, Betty had been wanting another child for a while, and they had been trying now for quite a while, and no luck. And then finally they get pregnant. And seems to kind of start, the pregnancy kind of happens around the same time as the affair, so, you know, great timing, whatnot. But, so they're conducting this affair, Betty's pregnant, and she's obviously trying to get closer, that's such a cute face, she's obviously trying to get closer to her husband because she's, you know, she's pregnant with his child, and she's, you know, trying to connect with her husband. It's not working. Like, she can kind of feel something's, like, out of place, you know. She's trying to connect, her husband's not really there, and yeah, it's just, you know, he's engrossed in this affair with Candy, and he doesn't really have the time for his wife at the moment. So this is happening while she's pregnant, which is absolutely terrible, but, you know, it is what it is. So their affair continues, and as it continues, Betty starts to get attached, or sorry, Betty, I can't with their names. Candy starts to get attached to Alan, like, we didn't think this would happen. And so, of course, you know, she's seeing this, but at the same time, Alan is too, because not only are they having this sexual affair, but they are having an emotional one as well. They've really connected with each other. They feel like they can talk to each other. And then when both of their marriages are kind of not in a great spot, this is kind of like their solace, you know. So, you know, this is all happening, and, you know, it's pulling them further away from their marriages. But, of course, they don't really listen to that rule of theirs where, like, as soon as someone starts getting emotionally involved, they break up, because, you know, why would they? So they just kind of continue along. Oh no. I'll have to get that in a minute. They just kind of continue along, and by the next summer, Betty has another daughter. And at this point, Alan is starting to kind of realize that this affair is getting more involved in his life than he really wanted. You know, originally it was just like, we'll have this sexual affair, it'll be great, kind of get that emotional release that he wasn't getting at home because everything was so stressful. And but at this point, you know, him and Betty are really trying, and they have a new kid, and so he kind of tells Candy that he wants to break up. And of course, this doesn't go great. But she ultimately accepts it because right before this, Betty and Alan had gone to this thing called marriage encounters, where they kind of like work out their marriage, and ultimately they did, and it really brought them closer together. And, you know, obviously Candy saw this and she was very concerned. And then shortly after this is when Alan broke up with her. So of course she's upset, she's angry, but I think she realizes that, you know, they have a new baby, their marriage is in this better place, like she really doesn't have a leg, you know. It's like, okay, this can't go on for much longer anyway. So they ultimately break up. Everything is fine, and even Candy and Pat go to marriage encounters. They don't have as good of success as Betty and Alan. Their marriage finds a little bit of that passion it was missing. So ultimately both couples, the break is, you know, it's actually good. No one finds out. Everyone's fine. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's move on to June 13th, 1980. At this point, the affair's been over for months. You know, everyone has just gone back to being friends, as you do, and you know, everyone's in a good spot. So that day, Candy had been at the church where the kids were gearing up to perform a puppet show, and she had been asked by her daughter if Alyssa, Betty's daughter, could stay with them that night and go to see Star Wars with them. I believe it was the second Star Wars. They'd already seen the first one previously, just based on years. I'm pretty sure I'm correct, but who knows. So she says that's fine, and she ends up talking to Betty about it, and Betty says, well, she has a swim practice, and so she says, well, let me come, but Candy says, let me come get her swimsuit, I'll take her, and then that way she can still come, because, you know, the girls really want to hang out and have this sleepover. Ultimately, Betty agrees, and Candy heads over to Betty's house before going to Target to get a Father's Day card and running like a couple other like minor errands, and then heading back to the church for this puppet show. So she goes to Betty's. When she gets there, Betty seems a little like upset. And so she asks her to come in, sit down, have some coffee, and chat. And so they do. And they're chatting. They're looking at Betty's new puppy. Super cute, I'm sure. And, you know, it gets to kind of a lull in the conversation. And all of a sudden, Betty asks, did you have an affair with my husband? Now, I don't know about you, but my heart would fall into my butt if I was in Candy's position, and I'm sure for her it probably did, but of course she's like, you know, denying it at first, and then finally she admits and says, did Alan tell you? And of course this is just like confirmation from Candy to Betty that the affair did take place. Betty kind of like has like a moment, and then she stands up and she walks out, and of course Candy's freaking out. She doesn't really know what to do. And then Betty appears in the doorway of like the laundry room, having just come out of the garage, where that door into the garage is in the laundry room, and she has an axe. So of course Candy's like, whoa, Betty, like, you know, what are you doing? Why do you have an axe? Blah, blah, blah. And all Betty is really saying is that she wants Candy to stay away from her husband and stay away from her family. And Candy's like, that's fine. Like, this has been over for months. Like, this was so long ago. She's like, you know, I don't want anything to do with your husband at this point. Like, that's fine. And so ultimately Betty kind of calms down, and Candy, you know, says, like, I think under the circumstances, like, Alicia shouldn't stay over. And Betty, you know, I guess kind of like regaining her, you know, herself a little bit, says, no, like, let me just grab, you know, a towel. Grab her swimsuit. It's on the washer. So Candy goes in the laundry room, grabs a swimsuit. Betty goes into the other room, presumably like a hallway linen closet or something, to grab a towel. She comes back. She's much calmer. At this point, she's put the axe down and it's leaning against the like hallway wall. And she hands the towel to Candy and just says, here you go. Make sure Alyssa has mints. Here's some mints for her stomach. And then at that point, since things had calmed down a little bit, Candy puts her hand on Betty's shoulder and says, oh, Betty, I'm so sorry. And at that, Betty just, she is not having it. So at that point, she picks up the axe again. She pushes Candy into the washer, picks up the axe, and tries to attack her with it. You know, Candy is just trying to fight her off her and keeps telling her to leave her alone and get off her. And she like is just full on just like panicking and trying to get Betty to get away from her. And they're scuffling with this axe. And at one point, Betty swings it up and hits Candy in the forehead, causing a cut on her head. And then she swings it back down and causes hits her right in between her toes on her foot and makes a cut in her foot. And so, you know, Candy has these injuries, but she's still trying to continue to just fight her and get her off of her, Betty. And at this point, like, you know, Candy is just trying to leave. Like, she's trying to get out. Like, there's a door to the garage that she's trying to escape through, but Betty keeps trying to push it closed and not let her leave. And she just keeps saying, like, Betty, I'm sorry. Like, just let me go. Like, please, blah, blah, blah. And nothing's working. Betty is just seeing red. You know, she's full on upset about like this whole situation, and she's like not thinking straight. And so at this point, you know, again, like Candy's trying to escape and she's not letting her. And so Candy like kind of pushes her back and she stumbles, and she kind of gets the upper hand for a minute, but then ultimately Betty still has the axe, and so she's trying to attack her. And so they're fighting together with this axe, and then it's somehow Candy's able to get the upper hand and get the axe, and she swings it and she hits her. Now, I keep pausing because I'm thinking about the scene, like they show the scene in Love and Death, like the show on HBO, and it was just so intense. And like I can't get that picture out of my mind, but I mean, it was such a good interpretation, because I'm sure, I mean, I've never been around like an axe murder before, but I'm sure it was probably similar to that. So she hits her with it, and then somehow I could be mixed up. She either hits her with it and she's on the ground, or she didn't hit her with the axe, but she somehow like pushed her away with it and she's on the ground. And you know, again, Candy's still talking, basically saying like, Betty, what are you doing? And Betty shushes her. Now, this is a big thing. So she shushes her, and then they continue sparring for this axe. And then at this point, Candy does get the axe, and she hits Betty with it, and she continues to hit her with it until she has hit her 41 times, killing her. Now, when the coroner did the report, they noted that she was alive for 40 of these wounds. So it was a very, very gruesome killing. Yeah. So now Candy is in the house. She does not exactly know what to do, but she knows she needs to clean up. So she goes to the bathroom. She takes a shower with all her clothes on. And she washes away all the blood, leaving tons of blood like around the house. And then she leaves. As she's leaving, she's essentially telling herself that, trying to convince herself it didn't happen. And so she's just saying, okay, so I was here, I ran late, like now I need to continue with the rest of my day. And so she concocts kind of this story, not really a story, but like kind of a timeline of events, that she went to Betty's, only for, you know, it was supposed to be like a 5-minute thing. And then she ultimately gets chatting with Betty, and they get lost in the time, and she leaves, goes to the Target to get a Father's Day card. That's when she realizes her watch has stopped and she is late, and so she gets back to the church late to the puppet show and misses it. And ultimately that is, you know, the sequence and why she was not there. So, you know, at this point, no one's like gonna rebuff her story. But later that night, Alan, who has been out of town, he had worked that day and then went immediately to the airport after work to catch a flight to Minneapolis. And as soon as he'd been calling Betty all day, but as soon as he got to his hotel, he finally called a neighbor and said, "Can you go check on Betty?" When they go check on Betty, of course, they find her deceased in her laundry room. Very gruesome. They originally thought that she had been shot with a shotgun because of all the blood and everything around, but it was determined it was an axe. Pretty immediately, they suspect the husband, but obviously, since he was in Minneapolis, they, you know, rule him out as a suspect. But they feel like there's something he's leaving out. There's something he's not being truthful about. And so, but of course, Candy is also a suspect because she was the last person to see her alive, and she doesn't necessarily have an alibi, but at the same time, they don't think a woman did this crime. They think it was too gruesome and it required too much strength for a woman to have done it. So she's, you know, ultimately, they're not really thinking it's her either. Until Alan Gore finally confesses that he was having an affair, and that person he was having an affair with was Candy Montgomery. So, of course, at that point, police arrest her. She was the last person to see the victim, and she was having an affair with the husband. So, of course, you know, prime suspect. Originally, when she's brought in, she doesn't admit to the murders, but ultimately, over time, she does confess. And she pleads not guilty by reason of self-defense. She hires an attorney from her church who really only does non-criminal trials, and so he brings on a outside party attorney. My hair looks terrible. Outside party attorney that does have criminal experience, and they ultimately take her to a psychiatrist who hypnotizes her to discover this childhood trauma that will have an impact on the trial. And then the trial happens, and it's this huge kind of spectacle in this tiny small town in North Texas. And essentially they just, the defense is saying that this was self-defense and that Candy was attacked by Betty with the axe because of this affair with her husband that had ended months previously. And the prosecution is basically saying that, yeah, she did murder her, but it wasn't self-defense. There were 41 blows. How is that self-defense? The defense brings up the psychiatrist who evaluated Candy and determined that this childhood trauma manifested during the attack when Betty shushed Candy. And ultimately, that coupled with her fight for life because she was being attacked by her friend resulted in this overkill that she couldn't stop until she literally wasn't moving. And like I said, 40 of those 41 blows, she was still alive. So I guess in Candy's mind, she thought that, she could still get her, was ultimately kind of what, she ended up telling as her story when she took the stand. The jury finds her not guilty, and the townspeople are not happy about this. She leaves the courtroom, people chanting murder, as they like to do. But ultimately they find that it was self-defense and that she, she had to kill her. Otherwise Betty would have killed her. And it's just it's just crazy. It's a crazy story. I've been thinking about it a lot, and so that's why I had to share it with you guys. But yeah, so Candy is still alive. And last, I saw this on the show and from what I found online, but it looks like she's living in Georgia now, with her daughter at least. Her and Pat split up 4 years after the end of the trial, so they didn't stay together for much longer. But ultimately she, she lived her life. I believe she became some kind of a trauma specialist or like a psychiatrist in her own right. So that's interesting. And Betty's daughters, they're still alive, and they, from what I understand, don't really have contact with their father. He remarried pretty shortly after Betty's death, and was accused of like abuse and some other, terrible things. And so, yeah, I don't think he plays much of a role in their lives anymore. But I hope this wasn't too all over the place. Being my first like true crime get ready with me, I wasn't sure exactly how to format it. I like being able to tell some of the background, but also the story, and obviously my timing needs work. But this is the final look. Very much like my everyday kind of makeup routine, very simple. Like I'll list all the products that I used in the description box down below. So if you want to see any of them or, see what I used, you can. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you would like, subscribe for more content like this and other things, as you've maybe already seen on my channel. If not, go check them out. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!